It's the balloon that's become a political scandal in America. This is the moment the suspected Chinese spy balloon was finally shot down over South Carolina after 8 days drifting across American airspace. President Biden has been accused of humiliating America and emboldening China by acting too slowly. The commander-in-chief says he decisively commanded US forces to shoot down the balloon, which they eventually did on Saturday, but that was 4 days after he said that. Well, joining me now. Actually, we've got a clip.
I ordered the Pentagon to shoot it down on Wednesday as soon as possible. They decided, without doing damage to anyone on the ground, they decided that the best time to do that was as it got over water outside within the 12-mile limit. They successfully took it down, and I want to compliment our aviators who did it.
That's Top Gun shades he's sporting there, the president. But joining me now is the American entrepreneur and commentator, Vivek Ramaswamy. Oh, Vivek, you're known as the anti-woke scourge of corporate wokery, so it's good to have you on anyway. I mean, we may get to that in a sec. But just on this issue of China and this balloon, it seemed to me a remarkable coincidence that in the run-up to President Biden's State of the Union speech, which is tomorrow night, you have a Chinese spy balloon just wandering across American airspace for 8 days. And it also revealed, I think, what many people fear is the problem with President Biden, which is his ineffectiveness when it comes to dealing with China. And you just have this spy balloon there and nothing happening to it for days on end.
So look, I actually think they were purposefully waiting for that spy balloon to fly over the ocean before shooting it down, precisely so they could have plausible deniability, because they were afraid of what they would actually find. So what they're going to be able to say to the public now, if I'm able to make a prediction, is that they weren't actually able to find the information, so they can't know, even though they sent these Navy divers down to find it. The problem is, if they had shot it down instantly over land, they would have to deal with what they actually saw. And my view is that China is not so incompetent as some believe they are. I think they were sending a signal. They have sent these balloons in the past, reportedly. But I think a big part of this was showing who's in charge. The idea that we can send this balloon over your territory and you're not really going to do a darn thing about it. And I'm sorry to say that they were basically right, because shooting it down after it's over the ocean was the equivalent of doing nothing about it. And then now the outrage afterwards is just a faux outrage from the CCP, for whom lying is but a habit of their culture. And so that's, I think, what essence of what's going on here. They flew these balloons over Taiwan last year, reportedly. Now they're just sending that signal to the United States as one more inch in progressing towards sending their projection of strength over us as a people. That's, I think, a big part of the subtext of what was going on here.
And what do you think is the likelihood of China attacking Taiwan anytime soon? A lot of people think it is more likely than not.
So I've been talking about this for a long time. I think it is quite high. I think it goes up for every little bit. It goes up further. I think it was not going to happen before October of last year. That's when Xi Jinping took over his third term as leader of the CCP. He didn't want to disrupt the apple cart. But now that he's taken over, it'd be the perfect opportunity to show and project force. There's a Taiwanese election coming up in 2024. There's a U.S. election, presidential election, coming up in 2024. If I were in their shoes, you would look at the current U.S. president and say that's a pretty good bet for somebody who's not going to take actually the right actions to deter this. That creates a potential window. Add to that the fact that the U.S. is actually retreating and actually even retiring some of its ships in the South China Sea. That creates a potential nadir of U.S. naval capacity in the South China Sea, right when China is actually ramping up its shipping production and its naval capacity as well. So I think it's unfortunately the imperfect confluence, which is to say, from China's standpoint, the perfect confluence of forces and alignment of the stars, to say that that moment to go after Taiwan could be coming sooner than we want. And I think this balloon was really, if I may say, a trial balloon,
right,
to say that, you know what, we're going to invade your sovereignty, see what you're going to do about it. If the U.S. didn't do anything meaningful for that, then I think that's a test to say that the U.S. may not do anything meaningful,
right, and they'll also,
in China's eyes.
And China will also be watching like a hawk what's happening in Ukraine and seeing how big a stomach for the fight the Americans have, right? Because there are increasing rumblings on the Republican side in particular in the United States that they shouldn't be spending all this money waging, a war, sort of proxy war, helping the Ukrainians defeat Vladimir Putin. They should be spending it on more pressing domestic issues. But I would argue against that if you let Putin win in Ukraine, that's a green light, I would say, for China to go into Taiwan.
Well, it's one step deeper than that, Piers, if I may. We don't depend on Russia for our modern way of life. In fact, even in the last Cold War, the U.S. did not depend on the Soviet Union for the shoes on our feet or the phones in our pocket. But the precarious position with China, and I think this is the defining aspect of this Cold War in the 21st century, is the U.S. depends on its rival, its enemy, for powering its modern way of life, from the clothes we wear to the electronics that we use. And that's what makes it so difficult to face down China relative to facing down Russia. So I actually think that it's, in some ways, it's a disanalogy, because even if the U.S. could take on Vladimir Putin, that's the easy part. In fact, do a thought experiment. Imagine this was a Russian spy balloon. There is little doubt in my mind that the thing the U.S. would have done was to shoot it down instantly and ratchet up sanctions on Russia. And the reason they didn't do it on China is because the U.S. depends on China for our modern way of life. The U.S. declared independence from the folks on your side of the pond in 1776. I think 2023 or 2024 needs to be the year that the U.S. declares independence from China, or else there's no chance of actually being able to defeat
who's
that
been
enemy
saying that
militarily.
For 40 years? Donald Trump. It was one of the things he was spot on about. I remember interviewing Donald Trump 15 years ago and him telling me exactly that. He said China is basically pillaging the US without the US really realizing what's going on. And it looks like he was right.